Assalamu alaikum. A very good day and greetings for brighter days when inshallah we will meet. I was also thinking, for one thing, that let's try to talk to each other, chat, or send an email at least. And if I'm thinking of that we can talk on telephone, if you people can give me your telephone numbers, or I think I can have it from Empower. Your telephones are there if I remember, and you can see how technology savvy I am. So here today we talk about in history of United States, HIST204, the condition of United States when a culture of modernism sets in after the World War I. And the readings in your packages are Post-War Society and Culture, Change and Adjustment. World War I proved really a game changer because most of what seemed characteristically new to the people of 1920 had begun to appear before 1917, and the change they noticed was still going on. I am sure you know that things do not remain the same after any colossal war, and the World War I basically changed the perspective on life and brought nations better introduced to each other. What America did was that they were, as I mentioned in the last lecture, the Red Scare, the communism, the socialists. So the America closed the doors to new immigrants, and this step ignored America's long history of constantly changing ethnic heterogeneity. The new law sought to freeze the mix, turn the American melting pot into a kind of gigantic ice cube. Instead of an open, cosmopolitan, I'll repeat, instead of an open, cosmopolitan society eager to accept in Emma Lazaro's stirring line, the huddled masses yearning to breathe free. I unquote. The United States closed the gates to this interaction. New social patterns were rising after World War I, and the census of 1920 revealed that for the first time, a majority of Americans lived in urban rather than rural places. This statement is somewhat misleading because the census classified anyone in a community of 2,500 or more as urban. Being an urban citizen or a city dweller affected family structure, educational opportunities, and dozens of other aspects of human existence. In addition, the married couples continued to marry more because of love and physical attraction, and each decade people married slightly later in life and had fewer children. You see this terror of war, and seeing people killed can have this kind of an organizational planning. Earlier differences between the working class and middle class family structure persisted, and in 1920, about 1/4 of the American women who were working were married, but middle class married women who worked were nearly all either childless or highly paid professionals. It means they didn't have a child to go back and to take care of him or her. And the wives of such families had to work. They had to work. There were variation in the role of wives of different backgrounds. Those who could not speak English well and had difficulty obtaining work. Italian immigrants women really worked outside the home. Italy is again in news, but so badly. My heart goes out to all the people in Italy and what really the catastrophe they have seen. There were important variations in the roles of women. As I was saying, those who could not speak English, they had a difficulty in finding a job. Italian immigrant women rarely worked outside the home. Irish American wives, on the other hand, often found jobs as domestics or, if better educated, as nurses or telephone operators or clerks. By the 1920s, the idea of intra-family democracy had emerged. In such families, husband and wives would deal with each other as equals, which downplayed male authority and stressed mutual satisfaction in all the matters of life. Much attention was being given to scientific raising. The child should be raised scientifically. One school rigid training, children could be spoiled by indulgence. Toilet training should begin early. Too much kissing could turn male youngsters into mama's boys. So you were not to show your love. The other school favored a more permissive approach, and this permissive approach was basically suggested a kind of a trial marriage, a period during when a young couple could get used to one another before undertaking to raise a family. I think the contemporary fashion of men and women relationship comes from this idea. The growth of large cities further loosened and constraints on people's behavior, because most others wrongly assumed that male attraction to the same sex was characterized by effeminacy. They are mostly unaware of extent of the emerging gay culture, which is so common in the United States now. And the younger generation by 1920 have described as the jazz age, the era of flaming youth. These were the two definitions given to them. When young people danced to syncopated African rhythms, and they were close to countryside in automobiles in search of pleasure and forgetfulness. Trends that were barely perceptible during the progressive era too reached with large proportions now after the war. By 1920s, paying calls was being replaced by dating. The young man called only to pick up his date. The two go off free of parental supervision for whatever diversions they wished. So this was basically the initiation of modern culture. And the idea of this young and new woman. The young people of the 1920s were more open about their life, and the leading American proponents were for birth control in the 1920s. Margaret Sanger, one of the less self-centered Greenwich Village bohemians. So these people were basically trying to save women's health and productivity in different fields. The medical profession gave some support to the both control movements, as who claimed that unless you are unfit for any other things, you could be trying to find a profession. Not that respectable idea. The number of women college graduates continued to expand, and 1920s proved disillusioning to feminists, who now paid a price for their single-minded pursuit of the right to vote in the progressive era. So the women's party never attracted a wide following, but partly because of the split with the social feminists. The battle for the Equal Rights Amendment persisted through in 1930s, but it was lost by the end of the decade. The movement was moribund. Then the popular culture of movies and radios came in, and many movies, they're tasteless, almost trash. They were catering to the prejudice of the multitude. The motion picture made one positive contribution to American culture, beginning with the work of Griffith. Filmmakers create an entirely new theatrical art using close-ups to portray character and heighten tension, broad panoramic shots to transcend the limit of the usage. I'm sorry, you might be finding that I halt for a second or two. I am asthmatic, and these days I am gasping for some breath. The pervasive movies in its effect on the American people was pervasive than movies. It was radio, because radio could reach anywhere. And then this advertising business had mixed effects on broadcastings. This advertising was a good business because the sums were paid for the airtime. However, advertisers hungered for mass market. And in 1927, Congress limited the number of these stations and parceled out wavelengths to prevent interference. This was for radio. This era is known as the golden age of sports, because Americans really felt good in putting themselves to any sport, and athletes, and there were women athletes who dominated it. And this was for good health, best leisure activity. So tens of thousands of men and women took up tennis, golf, swimming, and social dancing became more energetic. The turkey trot, a popular pre-war dance, led in the next decade to the Charleston, and what one historian called an initiative swarm of hops, wriggles, squirms, glides, and gallops, named after. The source of entertainment after war was provided by movies and radio. The first motion picture was made around 1900, but the medium only came into its own after the Great War. Success led to rapid technical and artist improvements, and by the mid-1920s, the industry, centered in Hollywood, where it still is, was the fourth largest in the nation in capital investment. Many movies were tasteless trash, catering to the prejudice of the multitude, but still they kept the attention of the public. In focus. I'm sorry, I have a bad throat, and I must let you know that I have a cough lozenges in my mouth that may not look or sound good, but that is the best thing I can do to talk to you. The immediacy of radio explained its tremendous impact. As a means of communicating the latest news, it had no peer. Beginning with the broadcast of the 1924 radio remained a best companion to American public. But in 1927, the Congress limited the radio stations and parceled out wavelengths to prevent interference. But the effective control was not there, either on programming or on advertising practices. This era was also the golden age of sports. Men and women both were very eagerly interested and occupied with it. It was not only a way of keeping healthy, but keeping healthy was one thing, but it also gave an extra socializing moments. Tens and thousands of men and women, they took up tennis, golf, swimming, and social dancing also got on a much faster beat and on a much louder instruments. The urban-rural conflicts came up also. Basically was a fundamentalism. This is a universal rule that whenever resistance needs an expression, a resurgence of religious fundamentalism is inevitable. The same thing happened in United States of America then, and the crusaders of the fundamentalists were there showing their resentment to modern urban culture. Modernism has not been an easy thing to swallow for fundamentalists. Then the urban-rural conflicts came up. Prohibition. A prohibition basically meant that the check on alcoholic beverages. The temperance movement had been important since the age of Jackson, but now World War I aided the prohibitionists by increasing need for food. Food was essential, alcohol was not. This experiment, known as experiment noble in purpose, achieved a number of socially desirable results. It reduced the national consumption of alcohol, and in areas where popular opinion favored prohibition strongly, liquor was difficult to find. But that the law was often violated does not mean that it was ineffective anymore. Basically, there were hypocrisies whenever there is any prohibition, had a deleterious effect on politicians. Congressmen catered to the demands of anti-saloon league, yet failed in grant adequate funds to the Prohibition Bureau. By the end of the decade, almost every competent observer recognized that prohibition at least needed to be overhauled, but the well-organized and powerful dry forces rejected all proposals for modifying it. This lecture will continue as part 2.